What's good? It's your boy, the Black Anglo-Saxon, and I'm back with another episode of From the Hood to the Hill. Your boy been working hard, but I am back, and today we're gonna be talking about the civil rights issue, the gutting of the precarious legislation or permissions that have been granted to us in these perilous times we find ourselves. And I've discussed this in the past. Y'all can go check out my gerrymandering episode. And I've discussed these things in the past. Y'all can check out the conversations that I've had in the past about how a bill that has to get renewed over and over and over again will ultimately face defeat in a nation that was born out of heathenism, because civil rights in America have rarely been treated as permanent guarantees. They have often functioned as more like temporary permissions, granted under pressure, weakened by legislators and forced back into public debate every single generation, right? And this is what we got to see. We got to understand that. The Voting Rights Act is the clearest example, a right that is literally up for debate every couple years. And we have to be honest with ourselves that we don't live in a free space if we have to keep continuing to debate our humanity as well as our civility. Because a right as fundamental as voting has to be repeatedly renewed, extended, defended, and relitigated over time. That alone exposes us to the precarious nature of civil rights in America, right? Because if the protection has to keep being renewed, then the system fully never accepted us as people. It never fully accepted it as a settled deal. So that means that you have to keep going back and back and back and over and over. And what do I always say, people? Energy is finite. Time is finite. Resources that we have to be conscious of, and that we have to be very diligent in how we use it as a tool. Because in my last video, I talked about, can we walk and chew bubblegum? And because people like to tell me, oh, well, we can do this at the same time, and we can do that at the same time, and we just want to party and bullshit. And the truth is that we cannot do both, because what you have to realize is that the opposition is not partying and bullshitting. It may look like they are doing that, but they are not. They are moving succinctly, providing us with things that don't necessarily get us to our desired outcomes, but yet and still we choose to participate in the tomfoolery, while at the same time understanding, because people will say it out loud, that our humanity, our civility, quote unquote, has to be bargained day in, day out. And you get a lot of people who are going to say, well, that's not true. Life ain't fair. You got to fight for everything. And the problem with those type of statements is that they do not acknowledge the fact that when we're talking about legislation that should be or is in fact tied to the Constitution, when it talks about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness and all of those things, that has to do with and is undergirded by the fact that you are human, civil, and have the same operating status within the ecosystem that you reside in. The fact that you do not and have to relitigate it every single time, you are reinforcing and rehashing. It's like pulling off a scab, rather, playing with it and then leaving it and hoping that it stick back on, because you have to keep redoing this process. And I want us to understand that this was coming. It was coming. And it's going to get worse because everybody still continues to party and bullshit. And why do I say it was coming? Because in June 2019, Supreme Court in Rucho versus Common Cause, they held that partisan gerrymandering claims are political questions beyond the courts of reach of federal courts, effectively closing the federal courthouse door to one of the most powerful tools used to dilute votes. Because they had already determined that that was above and outside of the scope of being litigated. So you live in an environment where, again, people put in their opinion that even though it is distasteful, even though that it may be quote unquote ethical, it is not illegal. And it is not for the courts to meddle in because it is a political matter. But the problem with that is that the courts are a political body and have always been. Because, and this is why I say that this is bound to happen, because people are going to tell me, no, that the court was an independent body. The court was checks and balances. But what we seen from the e-files and what we see throughout history and what we see coupled along with everything else is that, what do I always say, people? Networks in ecosystems. Networks in ecosystems. Why do I say that over and over again? Because when you have people who go to the Yales, the Harvards, the Stanfords, I was about to say the Blue Ivies, any of the Ivies, you have people who are saying, okay, I'm going to put this person in place. I'm going to put this person in position, because part of becoming a Supreme Court judge, last time I checked, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, these people are appointed, not elected, right? So at the bottom and at the core of what we're talking about is somebody picking somebody to be nominated. Yes, they go through a rigorous process, but that rigorous process is also filled with a multitude of biases. And I'm not saying those biases are inherently evil or malicious, but humans have biases. If we all went to the same school, if we all pledged to the same frat, if we all part of the same secret society, if we all came up through the same corporations, if we all go to the same dinners, if we all smoke the same cigars at the same vacations on the same island with the same kids, with the same people, same planes, what does that mean? That means that I have a higher propensity to have a loyalty, not to law, but to the ideological, political framework of the individual, of the pockets, of the ecosystems, of the networks, of the universities that have led me to be exalted into this position. And what does that do? It reproduces the incentive for the schools, the institutions, and these very same actors in these very same ecosystems to reproduce itself, because they are businesses, they are marketing, they are branding. Because every time you get a Supreme Court justice, every time you get a tech bro, every time you get a high level congressman, senator, etc., and you get to name and you get to come from that school or that company or this, they get to say, I built that. We put out that. Come here. This is why you come here, because this is what you could become. So it's never been independent. And why do I always talk about stuff in this framework? Because part of what we have to understand to even get to the point of being able to tussle with this situation right now is that we got to actually understand what we're dealing with. We got to actually understand where the rubber meets the road. Because so many people think they're operating in one thing and they're coming up with solutions that aren't sticking because you're trying to create solutions for appendicitis. When you really got, what do you call it? The bubble guts. You can't use the same thing for both of those. Can't use the same prognosis, the same attack, the same approach for both of those. You got to come up with something very, very different. And here's the part they don't teach, right? Because civil rights in America, they weren't simply won and secure forever. They were monitored. This is what we got to understand. They monitored. Because that come on a docket every so often. And when you monitor something, because again, the people who are going against it know that it's there, know that they don't want it. And this is what happens when you get people who say, oh, well, it's not that bad. Let's lesser of two evils. Okay, now evil is winning. And if we go back to lesser two evils. Okay, you only get one a little slightly bad here on out, but that sets up the person who on level 50 evil to just come in and crush everything. So what we got to do is understand that that is dangerous, because a right that is got to be renewed over and over and over, it's not a right. It's a lease. We didn't leased our humanity. We didn't leased our civility. Like one of them fancy BMWs. And we have argued out of our position. Because one of the things that I need people to understand is that the stuff that y'all say online, the stuff that y'all do, and the narratives that y'all let take hold also act as a deterrent and act as a catalyst for people to create policies around gutting you. And why do I say that? Because what you all have to understand, and some of you all may, but for those who don't, that when you say stuff like, oh, this is a post-racial America, Black people don't need nothing, we here now, that's what you get. Because what you got to understand is, for a person who's a politician, right? Or who is in the political body, like the epicenter of politics, you got to understand that we operating off of a different level of thinking. So if I'm your opposition and I hear you say over and over that you have arrived, that you don't need this, you don't need that, I can begin to take data, I can begin to cherry pick statistical facts and create my narrative to align with the rhetorical speech that's happening and being propagated right now by the very people who need it. So with that being said, you got to understand that when you say certain things, you allow people to come behind you. And I always use the language of opening doors. You got to understand that you open that door and people walk through that door and then they close that door right behind you. Because now we're in a situation where it's going to keep getting gutted, because you got, again, and this is why I say also, we got to be monolithic, because you can disagree, but y'all don't have to say everything online. Because every time you say that you don't need this, you don't need that, there is a politician somewhere saying, you know what? Let's use the connections that we have with the universities or the corporations who donate into the universities, because we all plugged in, and we're going to force this study to come out in a particular manner. Or let me not say force. We're going to coerce, because y'all love the word coercion, right? We're going to coerce this study to be wrote in a particular way so that we can use this narrative. And because it has the academic backing, because if y'all don't think that that's going on right now, these academic institutions have been co-opted as well. The same with the journalists, the same with the corporations. Everybody is on a dollar, the almighty dollar. All hail the almighty dollar. One of these days, probably on my, I'm gonna pull it up. But I wrote a whole, when I was in school, on the almighty dollar. How money is the new religion. What we gotta understand in this is that you can't be walking around saying stuff like, oh, why in this? Why in that? And then you're going to get mad that somebody come and create a crime bill when y'all around here creating narratives for YNs. Do the youth have any problems? Do the youth have any issues? Absolutely. But do that mean you need to be going around here creating narratives and language to actually inform and create a thing to be used to bludgeon you over the head? No. And that's what I mean by y'all gotta expect this stuff. When you sitting around talking like that, you have to anticipate that when you're in an environment where you have to relitigate your humanity, that somebody is going to take advantage of the fact that you don't understand. Because the story is politically convenient, right? It's always been a contested terrain. And the Fifth Amendment, followed by the poll taxes, the literacy test, the grandfather clauses, intimidation, racial terror, which is currently like, quote unquote, I believe that they're going to use ICE in that way coming up. A lot of people don't believe it, but I can see it coming. But America does not repeal your right. Sometimes it just removes it. And you can have it on paper because I have a whole episode about the de facto versus the de jure, where the culture don't necessarily align what's in the legal handbook because you need both of those to align, right? But the Voting Rights Act included special provisions, especially for plea clearance, which required certain jurisdictions with the histories of discrimination to federal approval, right, before changing voting laws. And that was the teeth. And when we say teeth in the political body, that means that's the oversight. That's the consequence of not doing something. So you can have a bill, you can have all of these oversight measures, but if it don't got no teeth, the executive has a propensity to do this thing where they just do what they want, because what you gonna do about it? You ain't gonna do nothing. It ain't nothing in there to hold me to it. But the special provisions was on a timer. They was there, but they was on a timer. And so when you got this stuff on a timer, boom, boom, boom. So you got to understand when people remove the guardrails, right? You got Shelby County versus Holder, and the Supreme Court invalidated the Voting Rights Act coverage formula under Section 4B. That is what determined which jurisdictions had to comply with plea current. And then the other truth is, you know, a lot of this stuff could have been prevented if people actually care about Negroes. Because the other part of the problem that people don't want to actually address is the fact that a lot of what's happening and going on is because everybody thought that when Donald Trump got in, that he was just going to do this to the Negroes, and everybody was okay with that. So it's like, oh, now everybody got to face the fact that what y'all didn't realize is that all of the things that we enjoy and that y'all enjoy and take for granted comes through the fact that Negroes had to suffer as a result for it. Everything was undergirded by the very thing that y'all took for granted. Without having people fight for all of these guardrails, you now see what happens when there are none. You see what happened when people don't have the capacity, the time, the energy, the discernment to move forward. Because a lot of people are paralyzed because there's so much information that they don't know how to consume it. Because you thought it was irrelevant for so long. Now that you have to consume it and eat it, you don't even know how to process it. But let me know what y'all think, man. I'm going to go ahead, get up on out of here.